Welcome, dear community, dear friends. My heart is so touched. It was this summer when I was here at the gallery, which I always dedicate to Deb Kaufman, my dear friend. I feel her presence here very much today also. I was here this summer, and the show Love Without Borders was opening. And I met the woman who founded it, an airline stewardess with United Airlines, who told me that she was in Greece at the time, I think it was 2015 or 16, when the first boat people began to arrive. And this one woman said, "What can I do?" And from that moment, she created something quite extraordinary. She started bringing art supplies to the refugee centers. And the children and the teenagers and the mothers and the fathers began to paint. And so what you see around you as part of the Love Without Borders exhibition is the work of the refugees in that center. I hope at the end of this the storytelling, you will take a moment to look at them and perhaps purchase them. I was so deeply moved, in part because I myself am a refugee and am touched deeply by all of us. As Senta said so beautifully earlier, we're all refugees. We're all exiles. But it's the exile, the homeless, the impoverished nomad that touches my heart. So in that moment, I said, I know what I want to do. I want to do a benefit for the refugee center, and let me share some stories from the book that I'm writing called Tales of the Boatwoman. So therein lies the inspiration behind this afternoon. This is a benefit for them. All ticket sales are going to be donated to the refugees. I want to thank Melanie and Center for Culture for Peace for hosting me and bringing this together. So the Tales of the Boatwoman is a book I'm working on. Again, I feel that the boatwoman is such a metaphor. We're all just passing through. We're born, we die. So the boat person, the boat people, is something that we all share. So Tales of the Boatwoman is a story that I'm writing. It's dedicated to my grandson, River. I chose the name Tales of the Boatwoman before River was born. And his beautiful mother, my daughter, is sitting here, and I'm so happy to have you. Dedicated to River, and it is 3 parts to it. Part 1 is ancestral stories. Part 2 is going to be my own creative memoir of my own life. And Part 3 is wisdom teachings from the boatwoman as she sails down the river of life. When I began to write the stories on the ancestors, I had one figment of information, a fact. And from that fact that my mother shared with me when she was alive, I fictionalized the stories. So these are the stories I'm going to share with you. There are 2 stories, are loosely based on the life of my great-grandmother Ganga Devi and my grandmother Dharamvati. So I want to thank Senta, who very kindly, when I came to her, said, "Senta, could you play some music while I'm reading this story?" And she said, "Yes." And today we just said, she said a resounding yes, and there are times when we say yes in life, and it actually is a beautiful experience. And so she is very happy, and I'm very happy to have had you. We've rehearsed a couple of times, so thank you, Senta. The power of story in our lives. Our stories are healing. Our stories touch us. They connect us to one another. Even though today you will be transported into the world of Punjab, India, these stories, personal as they are to me, are also your stories. Because you will recognize in these stories grief, joy, betrayal, unhappiness. The human story, in other words. So, sit back, relax, close your eyes if you need to, and let us take you on the journey into the Boatwoman. glasses. Without my glasses, I can't see. The sandalwood mala beads. Ganga Devi had already been up well before sunrise, preparing her puja altar dedicated to Lord Hanuman. Placing a few sprigs of fresh jasmine flowers in a silver vase, she lit the heavy-scented incense stick, brought out her sandalwood mala beads, a gift from her husband Somnath on her wedding day, and chanted the name of God 108 times. Prayers over, she carefully unwrapped the saffron silk cloth that held the secret text of the Bhagavad Gita and read quietly while the household still slept. She called it her daily tonic. Her prayers were important to her, you see. They anchored her to the river of her life. Without them, her days would be adrift in a sea of sadness. For even though fate had been most cruel to Ganga Devi, she rarely complained. Her faith, she confessed, was her strength. Her silence, her armor. God always works in mysterious ways, she would murmur as she moved quietly through the day, her frail body draped in a simple white cotton sari, the traditional garb of a widow. God always protects us. We must have faith. Born in the city of Lahore in 1880, she was barely 11 years old when she was betrothed to Somnath, a Punjabi boy a few years older than her, from a farming family living in a village some 10 miles outside of the city. A matchmaker had made the necessary arrangements, choosing a suitable Hindu boy who was of the same Kshatriya caste as the young girl. And a Vedic astrologer, brought in to study their birth charts, predicted that this would be a good marriage, but to beware, there would be dark clouds in their future. The actual wedding ceremony did not occur until 5 years later, when at the age of 16, a tearful Ganga Devi left her childhood home wearing a red bridal sari, heavy silver anklets, and a cluster of ivory and gold bangles, taking with her a few possessions packed into the back of a bullock cart. She was driven to her husband's homestead, a modest farm outside the city, with mud walls, a spacious courtyard, a small kitchen with a kerosene lamp, stove, a storage room for grains and provisions, and 3 tiny rooms. She found the house comfortable and soon came to love its seclusion, far from the noisy crowds and mayhem of the city she had grown up in, and many miles away from the nearest neighbor. Here, amidst acres of wheat and mustard and orchards of pomegranates and plums, she began her married life, grateful for a husband who turned out to be a kind man. He, in turn, admired his wife's steady presence in his life. "I must admit," he would boast to his friends in the village, "my wife has a sweet nature and helps calm me down, especially when I'm in one of those moods. You know, the ones I mean." Somnath was indeed inclined to dark moods that would descend upon him without warning. There would be many evenings when Ganga Devi, sitting in the courtyard beside her young husband, sifting rice for dinner, would look over at his wiry frame lying on the string bed, chain-smoking his clove cigarettes, a faraway look in his eyes. She did not dare ask him where his thoughts had taken him, did not want to disturb him in that way, but she worried nonetheless. During those early years of their marriage, Somnath would often come home from the fields late in the afternoon, tired and frustrated by the endless demands of the farm. As the eldest son, he had reluctantly inherited the land from his father, who had died a few years ago. And these days he complained endlessly, suffocated by the weight of this ancestral legacy. For Somnath was a dreamer by nature, you see. a man who sought adventure and distant horizons. "Oh, how miserable I am, Ganga Devi," he would complain, cigarette smoke spiraling through his fingers, his calloused feet propped up on a wooden stool, staring out at the parched fields before him. "Is this all there is to our life? Tell me." She never knew what to say, for she was a little afraid of his dark moods. So on those days when she found him sitting alone in the courtyard, his shoulders slumped, a haunted look in his eyes, she would run to her shrine, pray to Lord Hanuman, asking for divine intervention, and then hurry into the kitchen to brew one of her medicinal remedies, passed on to her by her grandmother, hoping they would soothe the ailing spirit of her husband. But alas, no cure seemed to help. The years passed, the cycles of the seasons turned, and life on the farm took on a familiar rhythm. Soon Ganga Devi would give birth to 2 daughters, Dharamvati and Savitri, and Somnath would become a proud father, loving them both whilst praying for a son. But fate was soon to arrive, and the family's destiny to change forever. It happened on a day when Somnath took one of his monthly trips to the city to pick up household provisions. He would always stop by Chowdhury Baba's restaurant near the Shalimar Gardens, eager to catch up on the latest gossip and enjoy the best gosht karahi, a lamb dish cooked in a spicy tamarind and tomato sauce, the best to be found in the entire city, the owner boasted. It was a Sunday, and there was much excitement in the air as customers from all over the city gathered under the awnings of the restaurant and amidst a whirlwind of chatter gossiped about the families who were leaving their farms in Punjab and emigrating to a faraway country across the ocean called Australia. Somnath listened intently to every word, his curiosity aroused. "Where is this Australia?" he asked a young bearded man who seemed the most knowledgeable of them all. "What is this opportunity you're all talking about? Where do they sail from? Are they happy once they get there?" He was full of questions, hungry to know more, at one point even insisting that someone please draw him a map on the dirt so he could see exactly where this Australia was. The more Somnath learned that day, the more excited he became, wondering if this could be the cure to his unhappiness, an escape from the prison of his suffocating world. His mind was spinning as he made his way home late that night to a household fast asleep. Early the next morning, just before the sun rose, the young farmer awoke to a terrible restlessness, like a fever that he couldn't shake off. He dressed hurriedly in his cotton dhoti, threw a light shawl around his thin shoulders, and silently made his way out of the homestead into the early dawn light, past the irrigation streams to the wheat fields on his land. The sight was sobering. Wheat stalks were beginning to wither, their stems yellowing, all ominous signs that a drought could soon be on its way. Scanning the breadth of his land, his brows creased with worry, Somnath suddenly found himself thinking of his neighbor, Rajkumar, a farmer who had become penniless after that terrible famine some years ago, forced to leave his home with just a few belongings. Some said that the poor man had moved to a dingy room in the city with his family, others that he had committed suicide. Somnath groaned loudly, remembering his neighbor with his brood of 5 children and the loudest belly laugh in the village. "Oh, please God, don't let this ever happen to me and my family. What would we do?" Overwhelmed by despair as he stared into an uncertain future, Somnath's thoughts quickly turned to the Punjabi farmers who had escaped their fate and settled in Australia. How he envied them their good fortune. How he wished it was he who was sailing to this new world, ready to start a new life with his family, and not just them. It was at this moment, as he stood there on the parched land, listening to the wheat rustling in the dawn breeze, that he gazed up at the reddening sky and noticed the crescent moon appear behind a bank of thick clouds. He thought back to the words of a wandering sadhu who had arrived in the village just a few months ago, who had spoken about the power of the phases of the moon over a man's destiny. He remembered he had said something about the crescent moon being a most auspicious sign for travelers about to set off on a long journey. Could this be an omen, he wondered, suddenly seized by a mad impulse to cry out to the moon, his voice trembling across the arid fields. "Oh moon! Oh moon! Make my dreams come true! Show me a way to begin my life again! Please, I beg of you!" Pleading to the moon like a helpless beggar holding out an empty bowl, the young farmer burst into tears and fell to the ground. He lay there for a long while, cursing his fate, ashamed and miserable, wishing desperately for some miracle to occur, when suddenly, almost imperceptibly, he felt a curious stirring within him, an elusive whisper rising from the deepest chambers of his heart. It was as if the moon deity herself had heard his cries and was seeking to console his aching spirit. "Your dreams are possible," she seemed to whisper. "But it is you who have to believe in them. You who must shape your destiny, not me. Be brave. Be brave." Like a sleepwalker waking into a strange dream, Somnath found himself whispering the ephemeral words he had just heard, at first slowly, and then growing bolder. He repeated the words with a quickening rhythm that seemed to take over him like some hypnotic incantation. "My dreams are possible. I must be brave. My dreams are possible. I must be brave." And the louder he chanted, the more breathless he became, so that by the time he had finished the invocation, he felt strangely restored, his spirits lifted up. Wiping away his tears with the hem of his shawl, he stood up, bowed his head to the fading crescent moon, and found himself making a dazzling declaration. "I will find a way to make my dreams come true, no matter what happens. I will find a way. This is my promise to you, O moon." Emboldened by the sheer magic of this moment, and now released from the torment of his unhappy past, the young farmer, his jaw clenched with steel-like resolve, made a solemn vow to himself. He was determined to follow his dreams and sail to Australia, and nothing and nobody was going to stop him. The loud crowing of the family rooster suddenly interrupted his solitary musings. The dawn haze was beginning to clear, and overhead a flock of black swallows swooped in circles around him. In the distance a stray dog barked. He knew his wife would be waking up soon, ready for her morning prayers. "I must be gentle with Ganga Devi," he thought, as he made his way slowly along the stony path back to his homestead. "I must make my wife see how important my dreams are to me." heat of the late afternoon that he would find his wife Ganga Devi sitting under the shade of a neem tree in a corner of the courtyard, embroidering a cotton bedspread. Their 2 daughters played nearby, chasing chickens around the compound. He could smell the strong aroma of their evening meal being prepared, a spicy eggplant and potato dish cooked in ghee, his favorite. He moved slowly towards his wife, squatting beside her, admiring her deft fingers loop the colorful threads into tiny stitches. Ganga Devi, he whispered, I need to talk to you. I have something important to tell you. And then, as if a floodgate had been unleashed, his words spilled out in a torrent of emotion. He told her everything that he had learned at Chowdhury Baba's restaurant about the Punjabi farmers selling off their land and settling in a country called Australia, of how some had received support from the government to emigrate, how others had remarked that this was the best decision they had made in their lives. His body was trembling with excitement as he hurried to tell her how his dark moods had lifted, how excited he now felt about his future, how he was sure his dreams would show them the way. A new world awaited them. When he finally finished, he turned to his wife, eyes shining bright, eager for her response. But Ganga Devi said nothing. Her head bent down as she continued her embroidery, avoiding the burning look in her husband's eyes. Knowing she would be taken aback by this news, Somnath nudged closer to his wife, stroking her arm with tenderness. Oh, my dear Ganga Devi, I know this news is a shock, but don't you see? I only want to dream a better life for our family. Is that such a bad thing? Come on, be happy for us. Ganga Devi reeled inwardly in shock. How could she be happy? This dream of his frightened her. How could he ask her to leave everything behind and travel to some distant country with only empty promises for a good life? It was clear that her husband had gone mad. A brittle silence followed before she turned to him, putting her embroidery carefully down, her voice strained. I can't believe what you're telling me, Somnath. Yes, I am in shock. How can I be happy? Tell me. We have a good life here, even with the difficulties on the farm. I know how much you suffer from these terrible moods, husband. But how can running away to some foreign land be the solution? Gazing up at her husband, tears welling up, she pleaded, Please, Somnath, I beg you, don't make us leave our home. The children and I are happy here. Don't you see? And then she paused. The problem is that you have forgotten one very important thing, Somnath. God has always protected us, no matter what has happened, and God will always protect us. You need to have more faith. That is your problem, dear husband. Somnath's jaw tightened. He was irritated by his wife's sober advice. How could she trust a God who could so easily destroy their lives with his famines and droughts the way he did their neighbors, the Rajkumars? How could she not see that a man cannot live without his dreams, that without a future that he believed in, he would simply drift aimlessly and sink into those dark moods? No, it was impossible. Blind faith in God was not enough. There was a sharp edge to Somnath's voice when he finally spoke. The real problem here, Ganga Devi, is that you have more faith in your Hanuman God than you do in your husband. Without my dreams, what kind of a man will I be? You don't seem to understand. Do you always want me to live in such misery, huh? He scoffed, shaking his head with bitterness, and looked away. The real problem here, Ganga Devi, is that you don't trust me. That is the problem. A stony silence followed as the couple sat there, caught up by the painful rift that had descended upon them. Even their little daughters playing nearby noticed and nervously wondered why their mother and father looked so unhappy. At long last, Somnath spoke up, his tone cold. Even though I know you are unhappy with this decision, Ganga Devi, please understand one thing. I have made up my mind. Nothing will change it. My past has pushed me out. Don't you see? I cannot go back. As your husband, you need to respect my decision. We are moving to Australia, and that is final. And with that, Somnath stood up, dusted himself off, and reached into his pocket for one of his clove cigarettes. Lighting it, he inhaled deeply and made his way out of the courtyard, smoke trailing behind him, leaving his wife sitting there in great distress, the embroidered bedspread lying at her feet. How cruel fate is, she sighed unhappily. My husband's dreams belong only to him, not to me. Oh, Hanuman, what shall I do? Please help me! Part 3. Over the next months, Somnath's dark moods lifted as he moved through his days with light-hearted ease. He now made frequent trips into the city, meeting with officials who helped him prepare all necessary documents for his safe passage to Australia. He found a buyer ready to purchase the farm for a good price when it was to be time for him to sell the property. He sent word to his family and friends of his decision. Taking out some of their savings, he purchased a one-way ticket on a steamship bound for the port of Sydney. His plan was to send for his wife and daughters once he was settled. He imagined it would take no more than 6 months, at most a year. Ganga Devi, on the other hand, met her days in sullen silence, resigned to her reluctant fate as she went about her household duties. There was nothing she could do to change her husband's mind. As his wife, she must stand beside him and obey his wishes, no matter what may happen. But oh, how heavy her heart had become. Early on the morning of Somnath's departure, Ganga Devi brought out her sandalwood mala beads and did special puja for her husband. She prayed for his safety, for his dreams to be fulfilled, for the prosperity of the family. She then helped him finish packing his suitcase, cooked a simple tiffin lunch for him to take on the train, and accompanied him on the bullock cart to the railway station located in a neighboring town. How handsome he looked standing there on the platform, his black hair slicked back, wearing a brown suit and white shirt, garlands of bright marigolds around his neck. How happy he seemed as he hugged his 2 little daughters. How deeply she worried for him. The whistle of the steam engine blew, carriage doors opened and slammed shut, and the train bound for the port of Calcutta pulled out of the station, with Somnath waving cheerfully to his desolate wife standing there on the crowded platform. "Don't worry, all will be well," he cried out, laughing. "I will send for you all soon, I promise. Your Hanuman god will have to protect me now, Ganga Devi." And with that, the train disappeared in a cloud of smoke, and Somnath was gone. Those were to be her husband's last words to her. For you see, Somnath was never heard from again. His disappearance was never confirmed. It remained a terrible mystery. Some reports suggested that he'd fallen off the ship and drowned. Others that the ship was wrecked somewhere mid-ocean and never made it to shore. And still others that he had simply disappeared and started a new life without his wife and daughters. Poor Ganga Devi grieved for her husband through those long, anguished days and nights, praying for his safe return, but to no avail. For in the end, the officials formally declared Somnath dead. His disappearance, a terrible tragedy. There was nothing more to be done, they said, feeling sorry for the poor young widow. The case is now closed. And then soon after came more terrible news. Ganga Devi received word that the property was being transferred to a male relative, a distant cousin of Somnath. He turned out to be a cold-hearted man who took no pity on the poor widow and her 2 small children, and instructed her to pack up all her belongings and leave the farm immediately. Otherwise, the letter stated, he would have no choice but to forcibly evict her. And so it was that on the day of her departure, the young widow took out her precious sandalwood mala beads, gifted to her by her husband on her wedding day, and walked through the rooms of her homestead, quietly chanting the name of God. Each prayer she offered was a precious keepsake of her husband's memory, now to be forever held by the walls of the home that she was leaving behind. Prayers over, she made her way past the silent rooms, past the chicken coop and the ancient neem tree, through the arched wooden doorway at the end of the courtyard, and onto the awaiting bullock cart. How cruel fate is, she thought, as she remembered that August day when she had arrived at the farm, a nervous young bride, adorned in bridal reds and golds, only to now, 10 years later, be leaving it all behind. A grieving wife with 2 small daughters, dressed only in simple widow's white. God works in mysterious ways, she whispered, clutching unhappily onto her 2 young daughters as they were driven past the fields of wheat and mustard, past the orchards of pomegranates and plums, past the Raj Kumar's old farm, heading back to her childhood home in the city, now bound for an uncertain future. God works in mysterious ways. Ganga Devi returned to the city of Lahore with her 2 young children. She settled there. She became a teacher for elementary school kids and later a principal at school. She died at the age of 80, clutching onto these sandalwood mala beads. These belonged to Ganga Devi. reading the Bhagavad Gita as she took her last breath. Thank you. So if you would like to stretch a little bit, I will have one more story for you, all right? So feel free to just get up, just a quick stretch. And then you play the tinkle. Why don't you play the handpans? Just play them, just because it'll be a nice background. And then we'll do the ting shout. Okay, my friends. All right, darlings, let us not break the spell. Let us come back. Can you? All right. Let us come back. Yes. Come back. The next story oh, I still have my glasses on. The next story I don't want us to break the spell, so that we are in this moment of the trance of storytelling. The next story is about Dharamvati, my grandmother, and the daughter of Ganga Devi. It is called Wife Number 2. My grandfather had been an officer in the Punjab police force stationed in the city of Lahore when he eloped with Dharamvati, my grandmother, a fiery, dark-haired beauty studying to be a midwife at a nearby college in the city. It had been a hasty marriage, an unsuitable match, many declared. She is a nobody, Krishan's mother, Sarojini, despaired. My son could have done so much better. What madness took over him? What was he thinking? Dharamvati's mother, Ganga Devi, moaned with equal despair. She is such a headstrong girl. In spite of their family's disapproval, the couple were in love, besotted by each other and determined to marry. It was Dharamvati who insisted they elope, carried away by romantic notions, pulsating sexuality, and a rebellious streak which her mild-mannered husband found exciting, though perhaps a little unnerving. Poor man. How could he resist his bride's seductive charms and beauty, he would confess to his friends in the police force. The couple were secretly married in a simple ceremony at a small temple dedicated to Lord Shiva, hidden away in a labyrinth of alleyways near Anarkali Market. There were no witnesses, only the toothless priest who recited some Vedic verses and married them off hastily. Soon after, they settled in a small rented flat at the far end of the city, away from their parents, and over time had 2 children, a daughter, just one, and an infant son, Kumar. Throughout those early years of their married life, Krishan's mother, Sarojini, smoldered in silent rage. She despised Dharamvati for leading her son astray, resented her for those dark dancing eyes, voluptuous breasts, and willful spirit. What terrible curse had that girl put on her sweet, obedient boy, she would sulk. And what was the matter with her son? Didn't he realize that his recklessness would break his mother's heart? That it would ruin her dreams to give him the most enviable wedding in the entire city? Sarojini's misery only grew worse through those years as she cursed her terrible fate. To console herself, she would light a candle at her shrine each morning and pray to her guru, Shirdi Sai Baba, begging for a solution to her terrible suffering. The solution arrived early one August morning when the heat was particularly unbearable. A solution that flashed through her mind like a streak of lightning, a gift from the gods, she would later say. She was lying in bed, listless from the summer heat, fanning herself with her peacock feathers, listening to the pigeons cooing on the rooftops and the almond sellers calling out from the street below when the solution arrived. A simple yet brilliant idea, she had to admit. One that she only wished she had thought of sooner, saving herself all those years of anguish. When the solution came, there was only one thing to do. She must act quickly. Throwing back the coverlet on her bed, she washed her face hurriedly, put on a cotton salwar kameez, her hands trembling as she buttoned up her blouse, and ran through the house, desperately searching for her husband. The servants were most puzzled and shook their heads. They had never seen their mistress in such a state of agitation before. "Harish! Harish, where are you? Where are you?" she called out as she swept through the downstairs rooms looking for him, finally clambering up the steep staircase to the rooftop veranda where she found her husband quietly enjoying his daily morning coffee. Springing into action, she pushed aside the beaded curtains, startling poor Coco, the poodle dozing nearby. "Harish, you won't believe it. I have found the best solution to this problem of ours." Her husband looked up from his newspaper, eyebrows raised, casually wondering what grand idea his wife had come up with this time. He was used to her incessant schemes and had tolerated them over 30 years of their marriage. He'd also learned that once his stubborn wife came up with an idea, she would never let go of it, no matter what the outcome. Just like that mongoose that hid under the mango tree, ready always to pounce on one of those unsuspecting chickens. "Husband, listen to me." Sarojini sank into the rattan chair opposite him, throwing off her sandals, revealing her bright red toenail polish. "This idea is the best one I have come up with. It is time to find our son a more suitable wife. You know, a wife number 2, like Raj Chandra, the lawyer who did the same thing when his son ran off to marry that girl from a lower caste. Having a more suitable wife, even if she is number 2, will have our reputations back and have our peace of mind, isn't it?" She glanced over at her husband, impatiently awaiting his response, but alas, there was none. For you see, Harish at that very moment was busily folding his newspaper into a tight roll, ready to swat a fly that buzzed uncomfortably near his face. "Are you even listening to me?" she asked, irritated. Yes, I'm listening," he mumbled, finally slapping the fly against the wall, satisfied that he'd killed it. "Whatever you say, my lovely precious dove." Harish was a proud, good-natured man with a head of thickening grey hair and a flamboyant Mughal-style mustache that he was perpetually twirling. In spite of his comfortable circumstances and the respectable job he held as a civil servant in the ruling British administration, he worried endlessly about money. So it had been with some relief that he learned of his son's hasty elopement to Dharamvati. To tell you the truth, he joked with his friends at his men's club as he sipped on his whiskey, this elopement has saved me considerable expense. No big wedding, thank God. But today, watching his wife's determined expression, he worried. What if this plan of hers actually worked? Oh dear, what would this wife number 2 cost him? In the city, in the heart of the city, near Sharanwala Gate, the Gate of Lions, was a small tea shop where Sarojini would often rendezvous with her son in secret. It was her idea to meet him there. Even though her heart was still bitter, she adored Christian, and these rare encounters gave her a chance to look into his handsome face and catch up on his news. She never once asked about Dharamvati. And he, in turn, never told his wife about these private meetings with his mother. Better to keep it a secret, he thought, since these two women had become such enemies. On the day that the solution arrived, Sarojini hurriedly arranged to meet her son at the tea shop. She had something urgent to share, the young errand boy delivering the message had informed him. Christian arrived early, worried that perhaps there might be some terrible emergency, only to see his mother step out of the rickshaw, smiling widely, wearing a lemon yellow sari embroidered with delicate flowers, her well-oiled hair neatly arranged in a top knot, a sprig of gardenia tucked into it. Once they sat down to steaming cups of clove chai, she looked over at her son, admiring his smooth-cheeked movie star good looks, the way his thick hair fell across his face, his dark, brooding eyes, his pale complexion. Christian, my son, there is something I want to talk to you about. She looked deep into his eyes and continued. You know well the shame and embarrassment your father and I've gone through since you married that girl. She paused, adding a teaspoon of sugar to her already sweetened chai. It has been very difficult, but now, thanks be to God, we have come up with a solution that will put an end to all our problems once and for all. She slapped the palm of her hand onto the table to emphasize her point, quite startling poor Christian, who stopped stirring his tea and wondering what kind of solution his petulant mother had come up with this time. Listen, your father and I think it is time for you to take on another wife. A wife number 2. She paused, wanting this novel idea to sink in. There is no shame here, my boy. As Kshatriyas, like your brave warrior ancestors, it is still our custom that we can have up to 2 wives. This is the best solution to our problem. And we will be most relieved if you agree to this decision. Will you? She smiled at him eagerly, eyes wide, her red lipstick mouth revealing a set of perfect teeth, the tiny diamond stud in her nose glinting in the morning light. But Christian flinched with irritation. After 4 years of marriage and 2 children, he could not believe how many schemes his mother had devised for him to leave his wife. Would she never give up? Sensing her son's frustration, Sarojini poured herself another cup of tea and planned her next move. She resorted to her final tactic, one that always seemed to work especially with the men in her life. She made a loud sigh and then broke down, sobbing loudly, ignoring the bewildered look of the other tea drinkers in the shop. Oh, you must agree to this, Christian, she sobbed, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand, her gold bangles jangling noisily. Otherwise, what a tragedy. Your poor mother will not be able to die in peace. Christian remained silent. Reaching into his trouser pocket, he took out his handkerchief and offered it to his mother. How he hated seeing her suffer like this, blaming himself for all these years of her misery, even though he always tried to explain that he would never leave his wife or even consider divorcing her. Why was it so hard for his mother to understand that he loved Dharamvati? But today, somehow, listening to this solution his mother had come up with, he had to admit it felt different. Taking on another wife, a wife number 2, could work. At least he would not have to leave Dharamvati or divorce her. It would certainly bring peace to his aging parents. And he was confident that once he explained the situation to Dharamvati, she would understand the logic behind it and agree to it. Looking down at his watch, realizing he was late for an appointment, Krishan buttoned up his khaki uniform jacket, took a hurried sip of his tea, hugged his tearful mother, and just before walking out the door, promised her he would think seriously about her solution. Sarojini, watching her son disappear into the crowds, smiled to herself. Yes, this time I think I've come up with the perfect solution to this problem. I'm certain my son will agree to this idea. And then, oh, happiness, what happiness it will be. Why didn't I think of this before? Several weeks passed until Krishan asked to meet his mother at the tea shop. Yes, he had given serious consideration to her solution, and yes, he felt it could work. He was prepared to take on another wife, a wife number 2. Sarojini shrieked with joy, hugged her son. She couldn't wait to rush home and share the good news with her husband. Harish, where are you? She cried out, her heels clicking brightly on the marble floor as she searched the house for her poor, unsuspecting husband. I have news for you, husband. Happy news. We're going to have another wedding in our family. This time the biggest wedding the city has ever seen. Poor Harish, sitting quietly in his office, groaned. Several months would go by before mother and son met again at the tea shop. This time, a cheerful Sarojini sprang through the door, clutching a large brown envelope, looking very pleased with herself. She had found a new wife for her son, a fair-skinned Punjabi girl from a good Kshatriya family in Lahore with no scandals or secrets to her name. She will be a perfect wife number 2 for you, dear boy, she clucked as she pulled out the photograph of the young woman. Look how pretty she is. What a perfect solution this is to our problems, isn't it? But all Krishan Gopal could think of as he looked at the photograph of the pretty young woman, the soon-to-be wife number 2, was how was he going to break the news to Dharamvati, his wife number 1. Part 2. Sitting on the balcony of their third-floor flat, overlooking the Ravi River, Dharamvati was quietly listening to the chant of evening prayers waft up from the temple next door. She was eagerly awaiting her husband this evening. He had said something that he had something important to tell her, he had said. Perhaps it was the promotion he'd been hoping to get at the police force. Her mood was light. She was going to surprise him and celebrate his good news by preparing his favorite foods. She spent most of the day in the kitchen, and then once the children were in bed, she bathed, put on a chiffon sari in a palette of blues and greens, silver earrings that sparkled in the light, applied kohl to her dancing eyes, a smear of rose lipstick, and and dabbed some jasmine fragrance on the nape of her neck, knowing how much her husband loved its intoxicating scent. The sun was just beginning to set, and the rooftops of the city shimmered with a rosy golden light that reflected her mood. She glowed with anticipation, impatient for her husband to come home. But by the time Christian walked onto the balcony, it was almost dusk. He looked tired, moody. In his hand he held a small box wrapped in pink tissue, tied with gold ribbon, that he handed to his wife. Dharamvati, I have important news for you. But first, please open this gift I have brought for you. She loved gifts. And looking up at her husband with her dazzling smile, she unwrapped the little box to find a gold bracelet encrusted with pearls and rubies. She wanted to embrace her husband, kiss his lips, hold him close, but instead he asked that she sit down. He preferred to stand. Why was he so cold? She wondered. Did he not get the promotion? Dharamvati, he hesitated. I have made a most difficult decision. It has not been easy, but I hope you will understand. He spoke slowly, firmly, hoping that in this way he would have the courage to find just the right words. He dared not stammer and appear weak. Ever since we married, Dharamvati, you know how much pain there has been in my family. The shame my parents have had to carry because of us. Their reputation destroyed. It has been very, very hard, but you know all of that, of course. Dharamvati looked up at her husband, puzzled. Yes, of course she knew that their love marriage had met with disapproval from the family and that his mother resented her from the start. But surely the two of them had found a way to make peace with it all and work it out, hadn't they? Christian, my darling, what are you trying to tell me? She reached out for his hand, panic settling on her beautiful face. He was silent, trying to find just the right words, when suddenly the temple bells from next door started clanging loudly. Evening prayers were coming to an end, and the worshippers began to spill out into the busy streets, calling out to each other, a cacophony of sounds breaking out through the cool evening air. Christian raised his voice, having to shout to be heard. Dharamvati, please listen to me. I've decided to take on another wife, a wife number 2. His raised voice mingled with the jarring sound of the temple bells, sending shockwaves through his wife. His head began to spin. Her head began to spin. Why, Christian? She pleaded, her dark, cold eyes stinging with tears. Haven't I made you happy all these years? She was devastated. How could he do this to her? How could he imagine she would share him with another woman, a wife number 2? What if this new bride became his favorite? What if she was the better cook? What if she hated their children? What if the 2 women fought? Dharamvati's mind raced with questions that lashed out to her, relentless. No, Christian, no, she cried out, throwing herself at his feet, the folds of her sari unraveling around her. It cannot be. Please, no. Don't do this. I'm begging you. Christian knelt down beside his wife, cradling her in his arms, stroking her hair, wiping away her tears. Don't despair, my darling. This wife number 2 will never replace you. Don't you see? You will always be my wife number 1. I promise. But Dharamvati did despair. Her husband's reassurances meant nothing to her. She felt utterly alone in her grief, suffocated by his touch. Pushing him away, she began to moan, to wail, her sobs reaching up to the sky, inconsolable and wild, the anguished cries of a woman abandoned. The hours drifted by. The moon had now risen, and an evening chill had descended on the city as the couple sat there, shrouded in painful silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was just a whisper. I don't need your promises, Krishan. Don't you see? Our love has always been pure. It has always been just you and me. I will never accept another woman to come between us. You must understand that. Never. Our marriage is over, Krishan. It is done. It is done. And with that, Dharamvati, the fiery beauty, got up, picking up the folds of her sari, and made her way sobbing into their bedroom. She bolted the door behind her and lay on their wedding bed, carved with intricate birds and flowers, a gift from her husband soon after they were married. All is now lost, she sighed. I must leave this house with the children first thing in the morning. But tonight, let me lie here on my wedding bed one last time. She gazed out through the open window, the fragrance of her jasmine perfume still lingering about her, and sobbing like a child, cried out to the full moon, "Oh moon, let my tears hold me now. Let my heart break into 1,000 pieces. Let my sorrows take me. What will become of me now? Oh moon, tell me. Tell me." And now we will go just a little bit, the last part of this. Early the next morning, before her husband awoke, Dharamvati, eyes swollen with grief, packed a few things in her suitcase, hurriedly gathered up her 2 sleeping children, hailed a rickshaw, and was driven back to her mother Ganga Devi's home on the other side of the city. Before she left, she took off her gold wedding ring, placed it on the pillow of her wedding bed, and left behind a cryptic note, cursing her husband and his soon-to-be bride. Over the next desolate months, the once vivacious beauty paced like a caged animal in her mother's tiny flat. Discarded by her husband in spite of his promises, she felt like an outcast living in a city that smothered her with its endless rumors and gossip. These days, she secluded herself in her bedroom, barely eating anything, her sobs casting a heavy shadow on the household. "What will become of me now?" she would wail far into the night. "Oh, what will become of me now?" The answer to her terrible unhappiness came unexpectedly one morning during the auspicious festival of Navaratri, when the city burst into a wild, exuberant celebration in honor of goddess Durga. She had left early that morning for Gumti Bazaar on an errand to buy sandals for her children. Seated on a wooden bench at Mohan Das's busy shoe emporium, patiently waiting to be served, she noticed a large poster plastered on the wall opposite her. It was an advertisement written in bold letters stating the urgent need for Indian doctors and nurses to emigrate to a country called Kenya in British Protectorate East Africa. There was great demand for medical services for the Indian settlers living there, the poster stated. If interested, please apply immediately. An address in small type was included. Staring at the poster for what seemed a long time, a curious thought began to take shape in Dharamvati's restless mind. I wonder if they will need midwives like me to emigrate to Kenya. We also provide important medical services. Oh my goodness, what an interesting thought! She was so startled by the idea as it flashed through her mind like a thunderbolt, that Dharmavati quickly paid for her sandals, hurriedly made her way home, racing through the narrow alleys and gullies, now fully decorated with garlands of marigold and silver tinsel, past the fruit sellers and cloth merchants, the pickle shops and tin peddlers, the spice merchants and tea shops, arriving finally at her mother's flat in a state of breathless anticipation. She ran into her bedroom, found some paper, a pen, and a bottle of ink that she stored in a little carved box under her bed, sat down, and wrote an application letter addressed to the Bureau of Overseas Emigration, Bombay branch. Dear Sir, my name is Dharamvati Gopal, a woman without a husband, and I am applying for a position as a midwife at a hospital in Kenya. She told no one about the letter. It was her secret for right now. A month went by with no news. She was beginning to lose all hope, growing more irritable and unhappy by the day when one morning, preparing a simple lunch for her children, she heard a sudden, loud knock on the front door. Standing there, beaming behind his thick spectacles and crumpled navy uniform with its gold buttons, was Raju, the neighborhood postman, holding a very official letter, postmarked with the stamp of King George V, from the Bureau of Overseas Emigration in Bombay. Grabbing the letter from the postman's hand, Dharamvati lost no time, ran to her bedroom, bolted it shut, forgetting in her haste to give the poor man a small tip. The letter, typed in English, stated that her application had been approved, and that she had been offered the position of assistant midwife in the city of Nairobi, Kenya. She was to start in 6 months. Oh God! Thank you! Dharamvati cried out, clutching the precious letter to her breast as she whirled and twirled around the bedroom, flashing her pretty smile at her reflection in the mahogany mirror, now dreaming of her impending freedom. Her thoughts went quickly to all that she needed to do to prepare for her ocean voyage to East Africa. First, she must send up a letter to her husband requesting a formal divorce. She would have to purchase a large steamer trunk and several suitcases. There was packing to be done, passports to be acquired, letters to be written, vaccinations, a one-way ticket to be purchased on a ship bound for the port of Mombasa, Kenya. She grew more and more excited. I am free, free like a myna bird. She sang, remembering the songs of her old Punjabi folk song, overjoyed that her destiny would now take her far across the ocean and far away from that most wretched husband of hers and his pretty wife number 2. Africa now beckoned. Dharamvati was ready for the call. Thank you.